So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Xpress Insight Python web development webinar. I see that people are still dialing in, so I give people like 1 or 2 minutes to join, and then we get started. Okay, so welcome again to today's Xpress Insight Python web app development webinar. My name is Oliver Bastard. I'm heading the Express Optimization Product Management here at FICO. I'm joined by Vladimir Rojic, who is on our Express team. He will do the bulk of the webinar, giving you a step-by-step demonstration of how to build a Python app for Express Insight, and also Johannes Müller, who leads the development of that Express Insight Python component, and he will be able to answer any expert questions you might have. Talking about questions, you have at the bottom of your screen a question mark, and if you press that question mark button, you should be able to ask questions. We have a Q&A section at the end, and we will respond to any questions there. I currently see on that chat that we have an echo. Is the audio clear? And I get confirmation. So the audio is clear, so we can continue. So what we're going to do today, I give you a brief introduction on why we're doing what we're doing, what the main challenges are, what we're offering on our products. And then I will hand over to Vladimir, who will give you a detailed demonstration how to get going and how to build a complete web app with the Express stack. So what's the main challenge? So we know there's lots of data scientists and operations researchers out there who build fantastic analytical and optimization models, but what research shows is that merely half of them are actually deployed into use. That can mean various things. It could mean deploying a model into a real-time production system, or it could mean deploying a model into the hands of the business users so they can themselves make use of the advanced techniques we are usually developing. And that's what we're actually trying to resolve. Yeah? So you are out there developing these very valuable assets, and how do we operationalize them? How do we get them into the hands of the business? The solution we are offering is Express Insight. So this is based on the experience we have ourselves and our customers deploying analytic and optimization models into fully baked collaborative applications. So usually start with the data and the data model. You want to analyze the model, you want to the data, you want to do some profiling on it. So we're having capabilities around this. So once the data is okay and you have developed your model, you want to run some what-if analysis on certain scenarios. You want to compare the scenarios. And for this, we have built in scenario management, and you're going to see that in the demo as well. We also offer some approval workflow capabilities for very advanced use cases. So this is kind of like the backbone of the Insight application. A key functionality is business intelligence reporting how to visualize your results, how to report on your results. We're also providing dashboards, so the ability to create cross-scenario views in your app. Some people want to go further and not only compare one or two scenarios, they really want to simulate, compare large amounts of scenarios, like efficient frontiers or fully fledged simulation. We can offer that. And some also might want to do some sensitivity analysis. So what happens if I change small amounts of data here? What happens to my results? We are including as well our modeling and optimization capabilities. We have very advanced mathematical optimization solvers, which you can utilize as part of this, but it's not a must-have. You can have a fully analytical application if you want to, no optimization included, or you can hook up any other optimization engine or algorithm you would like to the system. As part of the enterprise capabilities, we have built-in user management. We can manage multiple solutions. We connect to LDAP, for example. We can scale out the execution workers easily. So there's a lot of, just readily available enterprise capabilities in this platform. What you're going to see is we are providing an IDE as part of Express, which allows you to develop models and the application logic, and also to do the user interface design with it. So that's what we are providing. We allow you also to use your preferred Python development environment to do the actual coding work, and you're also going to see that. Once you've done that development, you just push the app to the Insight platform, and here you go with your ready-made enterprise application. You can start small, you can start with a single user app, and then extend that to a much larger set of users if you want to. And then before I hand over, just very quickly to orient you in the complete Express stack. So we talked about Insight, we talked about Workbench. Moselle is our modeling language, which is really targeted at optimization modeling and also programming, which makes that really efficient and easy to do. And as I touched on before, we have the Express Solver layer, which really spans everything from linear, mixed integer, nonlinear, and even constraint programming included in there. And the new feature we're going to show today is that instead of using Moselle, you're now also able to use Python as a equal member in the Express stack. Yeah, so we had tight Python integration for a while. All our APIs for the solvers are available in Python, and now you're also able to develop full apps for Insight with Python, and no other language is needed. Okay, with this intro, I'm going to hand over to Vladimir, who will take you through a step-by-step demonstration on how to build an application for Express Insight in Python.
Thank you, Olja. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so like Oliver said, we would like to showcase Express Insight by developing a very simple Insight app from scratch and live in the next 40 or so minutes. So the plan for this demo is I'm going to introduce the problem that we will be solving today, and it's going to be a very basic and simple portfolio optimization problem. So just a toy example that we can play around with. So we'll look at the data that we will have for building the app, and then after that, I will just skip ahead a bit and give you a quick demo of the final app that we're going to build. And then we'll start going through all the typical development steps. So we're going to develop the Python code, and that's going to involve formulating the optimization problem. And we're also going to build the web-based user interface using the view designer capability of Workbench. So the app we'll be creating today is for a portfolio optimization problem. So we have a typical investor who wants to invest a certain amount of capital. And to do this, they're able to purchase shares and build the portfolio. So naturally, they also want to maximize the return on the investment. And we have some data on the right of the slide, which shows the shares that can be purchased. So this is going to be our input data. And for each share, you can see that we have a share type. So this is the industry that the share is part of. We have the expected return on investment, the risk category, so whether it's high or low risk, and the country of origin. So our investor also has a particular risk profile, and this is specified to us through constraints on the portfolio weights. So we have 3 of these constraints. The first is we want to spread the risk, so no more than 25% of the capital should be invested in any individual share type. We want at least 45% in North American shares, and at most 1/3 into the high-risk shares. Okay, so this is what our data will look like in the form of a comma-separated value, CSV file. And notice that I've already done a little bit of pre-processing of the data. So I just indicated whether each share type is high risk or not, and whether it's North American or not. So I just did it purely to save some time for the demo. So as with any development or modeling project, it's very important for us to think about what data structures and data types we're going to use when we model the problem. So on the left, I have extracted some parameters that I think the user may want to play around with to generate different scenarios. And then these scenarios can be compared before a final choice is made. And on the right, I have indicated the data types of the columns which are inside our CSV file. And I've also added an extra column here on the right for the optimal portfolio weights. And it's also important for us to think about which of our entities are going to be inputs and which are going to be results. So I've just highlighted them in a different color. So let me now just give you a very quick demo of the app that we're going to be building, just so that you can get a flavor of how it works and the features Insight provides for us. And by the way, this app and the source code are all part of the Xpress Insight distribution. We also have an Xpress Insight Python developer guide where you will also find step-by-step instructions so that you can actually build this app for yourself. So let me now go into my browser and I can demo the app for you. So here I've just logged into my local Insight server installation. And when you log in, you get the app home screen, which shows a list of all the installed apps. And what I've done is just preloaded some sample apps, which also come as part of the Xpress distribution. You can also tailor the home screen for each individual user. So for example, it can display only the apps which have been assigned by an administrator to whoever is currently logged in. So let's first upload a pre-built version of our portfolio optimization app. So it's just a zip file which we upload through the interface. And we have the new card appeared here, and we just click on it to open the app. So when we initially open the app, the scenario shelf, so this top gray bar here, it doesn't contain any active scenarios. So let's go ahead and add this scenario to the shelf. And let's also load the scenario. And what this will do, it will just initialize the input data. So now that the data is loaded, we can review it, we can modify it, we can set up, we can change some of these configuration options and set up the scenario exactly how we want it. So once we are happy, we can run the optimization and get the results. Okay, so the optimization problem has been solved. And we see a table on the bottom left here, and this shows us the optimal portfolio weights. And on the right, we have the same data, but this time it's presented as a bar chart. So now let us suppose that we want to compare 2 different scenarios side by side to see, for example, how the optimal portfolios differ. So I'm going to show you some scenario management functionality of Insight. And what you see here, it's all built into Insight, so you don't need to implement anything yourself. So let's create a second scenario by cloning the first one. And now we can also add it to the scenario shelf. Okay, so what happened now is we have two identical chart series in our chart here. And this is because when we cloned the scenario, we essentially copied across all of the data from scenario 1 into scenario 2. As you can see, we can have multiple scenarios on the shelf at any one time, but the one which appears leftmost, that's what we call the active scenario. And this is the scenario for which most of the data in this interface is displayed. So let's change some values for scenario 2. So for example, maybe we want the maximum investment per share to be only 20%. Let's rerun the optimization problem for scenario 2. Okay, so now as you can see, our chart series are now different. So this really easily allows us to compare the two scenarios side by side. And we can add here 3, 4, 5 scenarios, and then they will all appear in the chart simultaneously. We also have what's called an entity explorer. This is built into Insight. And what this allows us to do is view the data entities of the app. So you can think about these entities as defining your data model or the data schema that the app operates with. So here we have our scalar entities for representing the various limits we impose on the optimal portfolio, as well as the objective function value, so the total portfolio return. We have shares fraction, so this represents our optimal portfolio allocation. And we also have the input data itself. So as you can see, initially this data came from the CSV file, but once it's loaded into Insight with the load mode, then you can also see that this table is editable. So this means that the user can make further modifications to the data before the optimization problem is solved. So just next, a very quick but important note about the entities. So just like when you are designing an SQL database, you have to specify the database schema first. And the same concept applies here as well. Our data model is fixed. And this means that the names and the data types of all the entities in the data model have to be predefined at app development time. And this has some benefits. So first, it acts as a documentation of the input and the result data. Secondly, IDEs such as Workbench and PyCharm can provide IntelliSense and code completions while you are developing the app. And we get this nice Entity Explorer out of the box. In any case, the user interface is always going to be tightly coupled to the data model. And we will see later, when we are developing the UI, that View Designer is going to be able to provide specific suggestions to us and very helpful wizards based on our data model. So this was a very quick demo of the app and the basic capabilities of Insight. However, there are a huge range of other features Insight provides, like scenario management, user management, execution, administration, but unfortunately, we don't have time to go into all of this today. So now let's delete the app, and then we can start developing it from scratch. Okay, so now I switch to Workbench, which, as Oliver said, is our IDE for developing apps. And just to let you know that when you want to get started yourselves with Insight, there are a lot of example apps and a quick start template that you can start with. But just for this webinar, I have pre-created an empty project to save some time. So very briefly, I want to tell you what makes up an Insight app. So we have a number of folders. So the first one is attachments. And this is for any app attachments that you want to distribute as part of the app. Then we have client resources. So this is for client side and any view-related files that you have. So we will be creating some VDL views with View Designer, but you can also have Tableau views, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files. They all go in here. Next, our model resources. So this is for any files required for model execution. And as an example, we have our CSV file for the shares inside here. Next is the Python source. So this is where you store your Python code files. So you can create any package structure or put any number of files into this folder, but the main file must always be called application.py. So as you can see at the moment, this file is completely empty. And the last XML file, this is called the Insight Companion XML. And this allows you to provide some configuration of the app. So now we can start with the Python code. And although Workbench does provide some basic functionality for editing and working with Python files. So for example, you will be able to run your project here. You have syntax highlighting, but Workbench does not aim to compete with mature Python IDEs like PyCharm, for example. And for this reason, we want to demonstrate that you can develop your Python code in any IDE that you already know and love, like PyCharm or Visual Studio Code. But then you can return to Workbench to develop the actual UI and to publish the app. So to show this, I'm going to switch over to PyCharm. Okay. So here I've just opened the same folder that you saw in Workbench, but I've opened it in PyCharm. And again, we start with the empty application.py ready to go. So the first thing that we need to do is to import the Xpress Insight Python package and assign it an alias of xi. So this package is available on PyPy as well as Anaconda. And an Insight Python app is just an ordinary Python class. So in my example, I've chosen to call it Insight app, but you can give it any name that you like. However, there are two things we need to bear in mind. The first is that we have to extend this app base class. And this just provides some useful functionality to interact with the Insight server. So for example, you can get metadata, read and write attachment files. All of this functionality is inside app base. And we also have to apply the app config decorator to the class. And this allows us to specify some metadata about the app. So as an example, we can specify what the name of the app is, as well as what version it is. And as you saw in the demo, when we publish the app, Insight Server will pick up these values and display it on the app home screen. So our next task is to declare the data model. So each entity of our data model is going to be declared as a class attribute of the app. So as an example, let's first declare a scalar entity, which is going to represent the maximum fraction of capital that can be invested in all high-risk shares. So we're just going to call it max high risk for short. Now for the actual declaration, this is done with the Python type hints syntax, so this colon operator here. And we've also declared that max high risk is a scalar value. So we can also specify the default value to be 0.33. And as you saw in the demo, the user is going to be able to change this value for a particular scenario. We can also tell Insight the type of this entity in the data model. So in this case, the type of max high risk is going to be automatically derived from the type of the default value which we've passed in here. So this is going to be a floating point number. We can also specify an alias for the entity. So this is just a more user-friendly label that's going to appear in the Insight user interface. So for example, if this entity is used in a table column or in the chart or in the Entity Explorer, we have the option of displaying this user-friendly alias. So next, let's declare the max per share entity, and this will represent the maximum fraction of capital that can be invested in a single share. And similarly, min North America. So this is going to represent the minimum total level of investment in North America. So far we have declared 3 scalar entities. Let's now declare an index entity called share IDs. So this index will contain all of our different share types, such as bank, software, telecom. You can think of an index as a primary key of the dataset. And if you've ever worked with the Python pandas library, then this concept of index, and later on we'll see series and data frames, this should already be familiar to you. So just in our example here, we specify that the share IDs index entity will contain string objects by using the dtype parameter. And again, we just specified a user-friendly alias. So now that we have an index, we're ready to declare a data frame called shares, and this will store the input data as well as the optimal portfolio allocation. So now we specify that this data frame is going to be indexed by share IDs, index entity, which we have just created. And now we can specify the columns. So the first column is going to be the return on investment. It's going to contain Xpress Insight real values. And we can specify a format string. So again, this will be automatically applied if this column is used in a table, for example. Similarly, we declare high risk. So this is going to indicate for each share whether it's high risk or not. So it's a Boolean column. And the last input column, min North America. So whether each share is North American or not. Finally, we also have an output, or in Insight terminology, a result column called fraction. And this will represent the optimal portfolio allocation of each share. So by default, when we make a declaration like this, Insight assumes that those entities are inputs. So we must explicitly indicate that this fraction column is to be managed by Insight as a result entity. Okay. Let's now declare our final result entity. So this is the total return of the portfolio. And finally, a constant class attribute, which will store the name of the CSV file that we're going to read the data from. So that's all for the declarations. Let's now write the processing code. So you saw in the demo briefly that Insight has 2 main execution modes. It has the load and the run. So in the load mode, you typically initialize input entities from any external data source that you like. And then in the run, that's where the bulk of your computation and processing happens. So the input entities are automatically initialized by Insight server, and then you are responsible for populating the result entities. But also remember that between a load and a run, a user is potentially interacting with your app, modifying the data and the input entities. But you don't need to worry about this because Insight manages this data transfer for you. So the load and the run are 2 execution modes available to you out of the box, but you can also define custom execution modes if you have any other processing or analysis tasks. So let's implement the load mode. And this is done just as an ordinary Python function. So we just have to decorate it with exec mode load decorator. And this is so just Insight knows which function has to be called for which execution mode. And we can provide also a description if you want to. So now what actually happens inside the load mode? So we are going to be reading in the CSV file and assigning the input entities. So for this, we're going to use the popular Python pandas library. So we need to go ahead and import that first. And then we can call the pandas read CSV function, and that's going to read in the data file and assign the columns of the shares data frame, as well as extract and assign our share IDs index object. So that's it for the load mode. Now for the run mode. This is again an ordinary Python function, but this time we apply the exec mode run decorator. Then in the run mode, we're going to formulate and solve the portfolio optimization problem. So for this demo, we're just going to use the Express optimizer and the Python APIs that it provides. But of course, you can use any one of the many optimization modeling libraries available in Python. So again, we first import Express package, and we can create a new problem object. Next, we create a pandas series called fraction var, and this is going to be filled with decision variable objects, and then we'll be able to use these decision variables to formulate the objective and the constraints of our problem in the next few lines. Next, we add our decision variables to the problem, and we can start to define the objective function. So as we said, it should be to maximize the total expected return on the portfolio. So we just have the return on the share is the return multiplied by the fraction of the share in the portfolio, and then we sum over all of the shares to get an overall portfolio return. So we have an expression for the objective. Now we just have to, again, set it to the problem and also indicate to the solver that we want to maximize this objective. Next, the constraints. So I will not go into much detail about how these constraints are modeled, but I hope you will get the general idea. So in each case, we're going to define an expression for the constraint, and then we're going to add the constraint to the problem. So our first constraint is we want to limit the total investment in high-risk shares. The second constraint, we want to enforce a minimum investment in North American shares. Third constraint, we want to ensure that we allocate all of our capital. So in this particular formulation, this also acts as our budget constraints. And we do not allow short selling because all decision variables are assumed to be non-negative. The fourth and final constraint, so here we want to limit the investment into any particular share. So that completes the formulation of the problem, and now we can invoke the solver. And after the solver finishes, we can extract the solution. So there are two parts. First, the optimal allocation of the shares in the portfolio, as well as the optimal objective function value, which is our total portfolio return. So that's it for the run mode. Xpress Insight also provides an offline development mode where the Insight app can be run without a connection to the Insight server. So how does this work? Well, we're going to use a standard Python idiom to detect if this Python file is run as a script or by Insight. And if it's the former, we just invoke a test harness, which mimics the functionality of a very basic Insight server. So finally, we used the sys package to indicate the exit code. So we just need to import this as well. So that's it for the Python code. Let us just run it from within PyCharm using the development or test mode. So as you can see, this ran successfully. We have here the output of the solver, as well as our print statements, which we added as part of the app. So this concludes the Python coding part of the demo. If we wanted to, we could now publish this app to Insight, but at this point, there will not be any user interface. So you will only get the Entity Explorer. Let us now switch back to Workbench and start to work on the user interface with View Designer. Okay, so the first step, I will just show you that our application.py file is the same as what we just finished with in PyCharm. And our first step is to build this app in Workbench. And what this will do is it will allow Workbench to introspect the application.py file and to extract the data model and the execution modes. So this has completed successfully. So we can close this window here. And now we are ready to start building the UI for the app. So let's create a new view. Call it portfolio. Select the layout, we'll just stick with the default. And let's make this view the default view. So once we have created the view, what's called View Designer opens within Workbench. So just about these new panels which have appeared. So the one in the center, this is called the artboard. And this shows the structure of your app. Then on the left, we have the palette here. And this contains components which we're going to be dragging and dropping to the artboard to build the app. And on the right, we have the attributes pane where we can configure the components once they are added to the view. As you can see, there's a hierarchical structure for an app. So we have pages, we have sections, and inside the sections, we have rows. Inside rows, we have columns. And then inside the columns, that's where we put all of our components like tables, charts, buttons, and others. So let's just first adjust some attributes of our section. We'll get rid of the heading. And we will change the layout to fluid, just so that this fills up the full width of the screen. So now I want to recreate the layout that you saw in the demo. So remember, we had a 2x2 grid layout. So this means we need to drag some more columns. And let's also now add the column headings. So this one was input data. One was configuration. Results, and finally, scenario comparison. Also now I want to adjust the size or the width of each of these columns. So these two, I will put size 5. And this one, I will put 7. So you saw in the demo that this bottom right column, this one shows the chart which compares multiple scenarios. We just wanted to give it a bit more width. So if you've ever worked with web development technologies before and something like Bootstrap, you're already going to know about this commonly used 12-column layout. So as long as our columns add up to 12, we're okay. Now we can add the table into input data. So we have here the table wizard allowing us to select which columns we want to have in the table. And let's make shares return editable as well. Okay. Now I'm going to add an extra column to the table. And this will be for our share IDs. Let's move it up so that it appears first. And let's also add some sizes to these columns. First one I'm going to put as pixel values, and the next two as percentages. We leave the last column to take up whatever remaining space there is. Also, let's make our table paginated and have 5 rows per page. Next, let's work on this configuration. So remember, we had a form here. And inside the form, we had 3 fields. Okay, so the first one, let's associate it to the max per share entity. The second one to max high risk. And finally, min North America. Let's also add a button. So if you remember, we had here a run optimization button. Just change the label. Okay, so now when the user clicks on the button, we want to run the optimization again. And for this, we want to use the concept of actions. So actions are very general operations that you can instruct Insight to perform in response to an event. So you can see a list of the built-in ones here at the bottom. So the one we're interested in is execute model. So let's drag that to the artboard. So how this works is we have a new action group. So this could contain any number of actions. And here we have our execute model. So now we have the button, we have the action group that we want to perform. Let's link them together. So we add the event. We add the click event. So here you can see all of the HTML events are available for us to use. And we select what action group we want to perform. That's it. Now let's work on this results column here. So first of all, let's create a label, which is going to show the user what the optimal portfolio return is. So I'm going to create two text labels. The first one is going to be just static text, showing us what value we're actually displaying. And the second one is going to be the actual dynamic value. So here we have a number of commonly used options. Let's pick this one and change the entity to total return. Now what happens is whatever the value of total return is, this is going to be formatted according to this format string by Insight, and the value is going to be displayed. So there, just to mention that you can put any JavaScript expression that you want. Let's now also add a table to show the optimal portfolio weights. So in this case, we're going to select this entity. And again, let's add our table column for the share IDs. Great, so now I just want to also change the width of this one so that it matches the table that we had above. Lastly, we have scenario comparison. So remember here, we had a chart. So let's drag a chart component. Again, a chart wizard opens and we can select what entity we want to appear in the chart. So in this case, it's going to be shares fraction again. Stick with the default bar chart, click finish. So how it will work as we set it up now is this chart will display the portfolio weights, but only for the current scenario. But we saw in the demo that we want to use the chart to compare multiple different scenarios. So what we have to do is we have to repeat the chart series for each scenario that we want to compare. To do this, from the logic tab, we drag a repeat onto the chart series, and we select the first option here. So now we get access to two things in the loop. First, I, which is the index of the scenario on the shelf, and we also get S, which is the scenario object itself. Just the final thing is to specify that the data for this chart series has to come from the ith scenario. Okay, so we're almost done. We just have a very small usability issue with our app. So when a user first creates a new scenario, there will not be any results yet. Right? So it makes sense for us to hide this bottom row completely until after the user has run the optimization and there are results available. So to do this, we drag an if block onto the whole row itself. Again, there are commonly used expressions that you can put here. We're going to select the first one. So this whole row will be displayed if there are result data available. Okay, but now we also want to add a hint to the user, and this hint should tell them that they have to run the optimization before any results can appear. So let's do this by creating a new row. Then inside the row, we must have a column. And then we'll just put the message as the column header. Okay. So finally, we just want this new row to appear only when there is no results data available. So again, to do this, we drag an if to the whole row we just created. But this time, we want the negated, so the opposite condition, when there are no results data. Okay, so that is the creation of the UI. Just a final note, you can see that View Designer is an easy-to-use drag-and-drop user interface creation tool. However, behind the scenes, what we have is VDL, or View Definition Language, markup being generated. So we can switch to the code view, and we can see what the underlying VDL code is behind the app. So there's a very kind of seamless integration between the code editor and View Designer. So this has great advantages. Using the View Designer, it makes it very easy for you to create the user interface using the drag and drop functionality. But then having also the code like this available too makes it very easy to version control your views and see what the changes are. And you can also extend the views with any custom HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's now switch back to View Designer view and now go ahead and publish our app. So this configuration step only needs to happen once. So if I click Publish again, this is now a one-click operation because it remembers all the settings from before. So let's now open the app in the web browser, and let me just show you that indeed we get the same app as before. So just load in scenario 1 again. You can run the optimization. Let's add a new scenario. Add it to the shelf. Let's run it from the drop-down menu. And again, we can change the values here and rerun scenario 1. Okay, so as you can see, we have ended up with exactly the same app that I showed you in the demo. So this completes the demo part. Let me just stop sharing the screen.
Okay, thank you very much, Vladimir. And just as a reminder for everyone, we are having now the Q&A session. So there's a question mark at the bottom of your screen, and if you press that, you will be able to ask questions, and we already have received a couple of them. So the first question is, does the Express and Python environment uses the annotation for documentation, or what's the best way to actually put documentation into your code or get a documentation piece out of it? Johannes, do you want to take that?
Yeah, okay. So, the annotations are not really used for documentation. They are used to declare the data model that Insight will use. But in addition to that, you can, of course, document your data model in any other way you like. So, for example, by creating an ER diagram. But there's no automatic thing that can extract this information to create a documentation for your data structure.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question is, if the inputs is coming from a file containing 100+ columns, so a lot of columns, like in a typical machine learning model in Python code, in such case, do we need to declare all the columns explicitly in the XI data frame?
So what you need to do is you need to declare everything that you want to use in the UI, but you should not declare anything that you don't use in the UI. So if you have a large data set, you would load it from an attachment instead of storing all the data in the Insight data model. So for example, you could store the data in a Parquet file and upload or download it as an attachment. If you want to show a dynamic number of columns in the Insight UI, for example, for previewing the data of an attachment, then you can use a narrow data structure instead of a wide data structure. In a wide data structure, you declare all columns at app development time. In a narrow data structure, the data is stored as attributes. This means that you have, for example, a float attribute column, which is indexed over the names of the attributes. And this data structure can be adjusted at application runtime, because adding or removing an attachment is the same as adding or removing rows.
Cool, thank you. So this is, with the attachments you described, this is very feasible, I would say, up to medium-sized data. Yeah, I think some people might also have a concern, and there was a comment on how to connect to databases with this. And I guess we don't have to store all the data we're using for a scenario run as part of the scenario, isn't it? So we can connect to external data sources easily as well.
Yeah, so there's a question about ODBC. So in Python, you can, of course, do anything that you like. So use SQL Alchemy to connect to an ODBC database.
Yeah, and so what we often do is we use those external databases for processing a scenario, and we don't necessarily store all that data inside the scenario itself. Yeah, so you can have external information as well. Okay, excellent. So again, if you have more questions, please ask them in the question mark panel. There's another question on what Python libraries are supported, in particular which version of Python is required. So I can quickly respond to this. So this requires Python 3.7 or newer, with the respective versions of the supported libraries of Python 3.7 or newer. Then probably a question for you, Johannes, again. Are there other data structures that can be used with Insight?
So the data structures that you want to use in the UI have to be either scalars or pandas data structures like a pandas series, data frame, or an index. But in your application itself, you can use any type that you like. The limit is only on the things that you want to push to the UI.
Cool, thank you. And then the final question I see is, what are the visualization options? So you have seen in Vladimir's demonstration, he used the built-in charts. We have a number of charts available which you can use. We are integrating with Tableau, so you can connect to Tableau and then basically build Tableau reports and publish them within the Insight application. It's a very tight and seamless integration, so as a user, you don't even see or recognize that it's Tableau except from the design of the views. And then we have a full JavaScript API, so you can use any JavaScript library you want to use for visualization, which is out there. Yeah, so that's the That's the options we are offering. And then there's another question: can we use pre-trained ML neural net models with Express Python?
So Express itself does not do machine learning stuff. I mean, the package Express, but as we are running, as your application is running in Python, you can do anything that you can do in Python. So if you use sklearn, then you can use your pre-trained models.
Mm-hmm. And what we actually do, I mean, if you really go into combining machine learning and optimization, we have a lot of use cases where we actually use pre-trained machine learning models, predicting behavior of some sort, and then even use those within the optimization models to drive the optimization, like I said, it's part of the objective function or as the constraints. So even there's a very tight coupling possible. Yeah. So then the next question is on cloud deployments, or is it on-prem only? So Express Insight is successfully deployed on premises and in self-managed clouds. We also have in the FICO Analytic Cloud an offering around Express Insight, and also separately execution capabilities around Express. So this is also available. One caveat at this point, so the Python capability on the FICO Analytic Cloud, so on the FICO Managed Cloud, is coming in a later release. Yeah. So, but yes, Insight definitely runs on-prem and on cloud. Okay. So I don't see any further questions. We are almost at the top of the hour. I just have one announcement to make. I brought up this slide a bit earlier. So if you liked what you saw, if you want to play around with this, please go out to our community and download the community license. It's a fully working version of Express and Express Insight. There's only two limitations. One is it's a single user environment for Insight. Yeah, so it runs locally on your laptop most likely, and also the Express solvers have some restrictions, in particular size restriction, but it's fully working and allows you to try out and build small applications for yourself. If you want to see more content, we have a very active community and a user forum where you can ask questions, where experts will respond pretty immediate to you. Okay, so with that, thanks again for my co-presenters. Thank you for joining, and that concludes today's webinar.